My siblings cut me out of the inheritance, so I took them to court. I never imagined I would be sitting in a courtroom fighting my own family, but here I was, papers in hand, heart racing, stomach tied in knots. It all started after my father passed away, a man I loved fiercely, who had always been fair and thoughtful. I had spent countless hours by his side during his final illness, managing appointments, handling bills, and being the one who ensured he was comfortable. I thought that when the time came, we would divide his estate fairly, just like he had always promised. But I was wrong. A few weeks after his funeral, I learned through a casual comment by my cousin that my siblings had gone behind my back and made arrangements to exclude me entirely. They claimed I had already received enough support from Dad while he was alive, that I was too independent, that somehow I didn't deserve my share. I remember the rage that burned in my chest and the disbelief that froze my mind. How could the people I grew up with, the people I thought I could trust, do this to me? I tried to reason with them at first. I called my older brother, my voice trembling, and asked why this had happened. He avoided my questions, deflected blame, and finally hung up. My sister refused to speak to me entirely, sending curt text messages that barely qualified as communication. It felt like a dagger to the heart, my own blood treating me like an intruder in the family I had always loved. Days passed in a blur of anger, sadness, and sleepless nights. I walked through the empty house my father had left behind, touching the furniture, the photos, the memories, and wondering how any of this could have happened. Every object felt tainted by betrayal. Finally, after consulting a lawyer, I made the decision that would haunt and define the next months of my life. I would take my siblings to court. The thought of it made me sick with anxiety. I imagined the courtroom, the stares, the whispers, the possibility that I would be branded as greedy or vindictive. But I also knew that if I didn't fight, I would lose not only the inheritance but the respect for myself. The first court hearing was a shock to my system. I walked in wearing my best suit, heart pounding so hard I thought it might betray me. My siblings were already there, sitting together like a united front, whispering and smirking, confident in the fact that I had no idea what I was doing. I forced myself to stand tall, to meet their eyes, to remind myself that I had every right to be there. The judge entered, a stern woman with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. As the proceedings began, my lawyer laid out the facts. My father had always intended for me to receive an equal share. There were witnesses who could attest to my father's wishes, and the sudden exclusion from the inheritance was unjust and possibly fraudulent. My siblings' attorney countered swiftly, claiming that my father had changed his mind in private conversations, that I had received sufficient gifts in the past, and that family dynamics justified their decision. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every word felt like a bullet, every rebuttal like a punch to the gut. I could feel my hands shaking under the table, my throat tight, my mind racing. But I refused to break. I couldn't. For every smirk, every condescending glance, I held onto the memory of my father, of the hours I had spent caring for him, of the love and respect I had shown. That love became my armor. Weeks turned into months as the case dragged on. Depositions, document requests, witness testimonies. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and every interaction with my siblings was a battle. They would call me sometimes to talk, but their words were laced with manipulation and thinly veiled threats. I learned to brace myself, to take deep breaths, and to respond calmly, without letting my emotions dictate my actions. At night, I would lie awake replaying conversations, wondering if I had done the right thing. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being greedy? Was this petty? But then I remembered the nights I spent at my father's side, the sacrifices I made, the loyalty I showed, and I knew I was justified. One particularly tense hearing involved a witness who had been present during a discussion about the inheritance. My sibling's attorney tried to discredit the witness, painting them as biased and unreliable. My heart pounded as the witness recounted in clear and unwavering terms my father's intention to treat me equally. I could see my siblings' faces pale, their confidence faltering just a little. It was a small victory, but a critical one. Outside the courtroom, life didn't pause. My friends noticed my stress, my exhaustion, and my preoccupation. Lisa, my closest friend since childhood, became my confidant. She listened to my fears, helped me plan my next steps, and reminded me that I was not alone. Her support was invaluable. Without it, I might have crumbled under the weight of betrayal and legal complexity. I also began to understand the deeper implications of what I was fighting for. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, acknowledgement, and the principle that loyalty and care should not be punished. Every document filed, every witness called, every argument presented was a stand for justice, not just for me, but for the values my father had instilled in all of us. And then came the turning point. A letter arrived from a distant relative who had observed the family's interactions and had overheard conversations that confirmed my father's intentions. The letter, submitted as evidence, corroborated everything my lawyer had been arguing. Suddenly, the tide began to shift. My siblings could no longer claim private discussions or changes of heart without facing undeniable proof to the contrary. I felt a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. I wanted this to end, but I also knew the importance of seeing it through fully. The courtroom became a stage for emotional revelations. My siblings, frustrated and flustered, began revealing cracks in their story. Their unity faltered under pressure, and for the first time, I saw them as flawed, fallible human beings rather than invincible adversaries. I felt no joy in this. It was simply the reality of the situation. The final hearing loomed, and I prepared meticulously. I reviewed every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. I rehearsed my statements, focusing on clarity and composure. The night before, sleep evaded me entirely, my mind racing through scenarios, imagining the worst outcomes. But when I walked into the courtroom the next day, I carried with me the strength of months of preparation, the support of friends, and the memory of my father's trust and love. The proceedings were tense, filled with pauses, objections, and emotional exchanges. But as the judge listened, reviewed the evidence, and asked pointed questions, I could sense the balance tilting in my favor. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge announced that the evidence overwhelmingly supported my claim. I was entitled to my fair share of the inheritance, and my siblings' attempts to exclude me were deemed unjust. Relief, disbelief, and a profound sense of validation washed over me. The tension I had carried for months lifted, replaced by a mixture of triumph and sorrow. Triumph for justice served, sorrow for the fractured relationships that might never fully heal. As I left the courtroom that day, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the anger. It had all been real. But so had my resolve, my perseverance, and the support I had received along the way. I realized that standing up for oneself, even against family, is not an act of malice, but an act of self-respect and integrity. I had honored my father, preserved my dignity, and secured what was rightfully mine. And yet, even in victory, I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Healing relationships, rebuilding trust, and navigating the complex emotions that lingered would take time. But I also knew that I had proven something essential, not only to my family, but to myself, that I am capable of courage, resilience, and unwavering adherence to what is just. Am I wrong for taking my siblings to court over the inheritance? Absolutely not. I acted with principle, persistence, and respect for my father's wishes. And in doing so, I discovered the true meaning of standing up for oneself, the power of preparation and patience, and the invaluable strength of moral conviction. The weeks following the initial courtroom victory were far from peaceful. While I had legally secured my inheritance, the emotional fallout from confronting my siblings continued to swirl around me like a storm that refused to pass. Family gatherings became minefields of tension, forced smiles, and half-hearted conversations. Every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope, one misstep away from a verbal explosion. Even though I had won, it didn't feel like victory. There was an emptiness, a void where trust and camaraderie should have been, and I realized just how deeply betrayal can cut, even when tempered by justice. My siblings predictably did not take the ruling well. My older brother began avoiding phone calls entirely, only communicating through terse emails or the occasional passive-aggressive message about moving on and not dwelling on money. My sister's attitude was subtler, but equally hurtful. She would make veiled remarks at family dinners about greed or what some people will do for money, clearly aimed at me. Every jab was a reminder that the battle I had fought was not over, not in the court of family opinion. I found myself retreating more and more, burying myself in work and friends, trying to preserve my mental health. The constant strain was exhausting, but I had learned over months of litigation that boundaries were essential, not just legally, but emotionally. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing financial documents to ensure everything from the estate was handled properly, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. It was my father's longtime friend, a man I had always respected. His voice carried a mixture of sadness and concern. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "Your father would have wanted you to have peace, not conflict. Are you okay?" His words pierced me. For a moment I allowed myself to cry. Cry for my father, cry for the family I had lost, and cry for the emotional toll that justice had extracted from me. I realized that winning on paper didn't automatically heal the heart. That night, I resolved to find a balance between standing my ground and seeking reconciliation, though I knew it would be delicate. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A distant cousin, who had been acting as a mediator throughout the inheritance disputes, approached me with a proposal. They suggested a family meeting, one last attempt to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. I was skeptical. I had learned that gestures of goodwill could be manipulated, that my siblings were skilled at twisting words and intentions to guilt or shame me. Yet the idea of closure, however fragile, was appealing. We agreed to meet at my uncle's house, neutral territory where tensions could be monitored and managed. The day of the meeting was tense from the start. I arrived early, reviewing notes and reminders to stay calm, factual, and composed. My siblings trickled in, each carrying a mix of apprehension, pride, and resentment. Lisa, my childhood friend, had offered to accompany me for moral support, and her presence was a quiet anchor in the storm. The meeting began awkwardly, with hesitant pleasantries and stiff smiles. I felt the weight of every gaze, every unsaid accusation pressing against me. Then my brother spoke. He framed the conversation as a discussion about family unity and healing wounds. I nodded politely, keeping my own responses neutral, carefully avoiding any emotional triggers that could derail the fragile truce. One by one, issues were raised: the estate, past grievances, perceived slights. I listened, occasionally interjecting with facts, evidence, or gentle reminders of our father's intentions. There were moments of sharp tension. My sister accused me of never caring about the family until money was involved, and I countered with examples of the support, care, and sacrifices I had made for our father. It was exhausting. Every word a negotiation of emotion and truth. Hours passed like days. Exhaustion threatened to overtake me, but I pressed on, determined to leave the meeting with some form of closure. Slowly, cracks began to show in my siblings' defenses. My brother admitted, almost reluctantly, that some of their assumptions about my inheritance were unfair, that they had been influenced by resentment and envy rather than truth. My sister, still defensive, softened slightly when confronted with undeniable evidence of my father's intentions and the sacrifices I had made during his illness. By the end of the meeting, we hadn't reached perfect reconciliation, but there was a sense of understanding that had been missing before. I left feeling drained but cautiously hopeful. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I managed my inheritance responsibly, investing wisely, and ensuring that my father's legacy was preserved in a way he would have approved. My relationship with Lisa deepened. She had been a steadfast support throughout the ordeal, offering both practical advice and emotional stability. She helped me process the complex emotions of betrayal, justice, and family loyalty, reminding me that protecting oneself is not betrayal, but self-respect. And yet, despite these positive developments, I could not ignore the lingering sense of loss. My siblings, though softened, remained distant. Family gatherings were quieter, smiles more cautious, laughter less spontaneous. I realized that some wounds take time to heal, and that while the legal battle was over, the emotional consequences would linger for years. One particularly difficult moment came during a family holiday. We were all gathered around the dinner table, the air heavy with unspoken tension. My siblings made polite conversation, but the warmth that should have filled the room was absent. I caught myself longing for the carefree dynamics of our childhood, for the days before inheritance, before betrayal, before courtrooms and legal documents. It was a bitter pill to swallow, the realization that life doesn't always restore things to the way they were, and that sometimes, even after justice is served, the emotional landscape is permanently altered. Still, I took solace in the growth I had experienced. I had learned resilience, assertiveness, and the importance of boundaries. I had confronted betrayal and emerged intact, wiser and stronger. I had honored my father's intentions and preserved my own integrity, even when it meant standing alone. As I reflected on the journey, I understood that this experience, painful as it was, had shaped me in profound ways. I had discovered that family is not defined solely by blood, but by trust, respect, and shared values. And I had learned that standing up for oneself, even against those we love, is sometimes the truest act of loyalty, not to others, but to ourselves. I began documenting the events, not for public attention, but as a personal record of lessons learned. Each entry reminded me of the importance of courage, preparation, and clarity. I noted the moments of despair, the fleeting victories, and the emotional breakthroughs. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to process both the pain and the triumph. By the time the next court-related matter arose, an appeal my siblings filed in a final desperate attempt to reclaim what they had lost, I was prepared. I had legal counsel, emotional fortitude, and a clear sense of my own worth. The hearings were tense, but with the prior evidence and testimonies already established, the appeal was quickly dismissed. The relief was immense, though tempered by the realization that my relationship with my siblings might never fully recover. I began to make peace with that. Life, I realized, is about moving forward, embracing the lessons, and protecting one's own integrity. Am I wrong for taking my siblings to court over the inheritance? Absolutely not. I acted with respect for my father's wishes, with diligence, and with the courage to stand for what was right. The emotional cost was high, the familial bonds strained, but the experience reinforced values that would serve me for a lifetime. I emerged not only with what was legally mine, but with a deeper understanding of justice, resilience, and self-respect. I had fought for my father's legacy, for fairness, and for myself. And in doing so, I had discovered the strength that comes from facing betrayal head-on and refusing to be silenced, intimidated, or overlooked. The aftermath of the court battles left a strange void in my life. While I had legally secured my inheritance and proved my case, the emotional turbulence was far from over. My siblings had grown quiet, but their quietness was not peace. It was simmering resentment, a tension that hovered over every interaction like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. Even casual conversations with extended family were tinged with awkwardness, subtle jabs, and the kind of passive aggression that makes one constantly second-guess every word and gesture. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner in particular. I had decided to attend, hoping to show that I was not vindictive, that I could still be part of the family despite everything. But from the moment I stepped in, I felt the weight of judgment in every glance, every forced smile. My sister, sitting across from me, made a comment about people who only care about money, and my brother muttered under his breath something about never being satisfied. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to breathe deeply and not respond with anger. I realized in that moment that no amount of legal victory could shield me from the emotional cost of betrayal. It was exhausting. Every interaction a negotiation of restraint versus the desire to defend myself. In the weeks following, I began to notice subtle shifts in my own behavior. I was guarded, hyper-aware of how I presented myself, and cautious in conversations about family matters. I found solace in friends like Lisa, who reminded me to separate my worth from their opinions, and to recognize that boundaries were not just a legal necessity, but a psychological one. One evening, as I walked home from work, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I thought about my father, about the countless hours I had spent caring for him, managing his affairs, and offering comfort in his final days. Those memories were bittersweet. They reminded me of love, duty, and sacrifice, but also of the betrayal I had endured from the people I had trusted most. I realized that the inheritance battle had been about far more than money. It had been about respect, recognition, and justice. It had been about standing up for oneself in the face of opposition, even when that opposition came from those who shared your blood. As time went on, small victories began to emerge in unexpected ways. A distant cousin, who had previously stayed neutral, reached out to express support and admiration for my perseverance. My father's friends, who had witnessed my dedication and integrity, offered encouragement and reassurance. These gestures reminded me that my actions were not just about asserting a legal right. They were about preserving honor, dignity, and the values my father had instilled in me. And yet, despite these affirmations, the tension with my siblings persisted. They continued to avoid direct confrontation, but their avoidance was a form of silent judgment, a reminder that while the court had ruled in my favor, the emotional ledger was far from balanced. I began to understand that some wounds, especially those inflicted by betrayal, are not healed by legal rulings alone. Emotional reconciliation is a different battle, one that requires time, patience, and sometimes acceptance that full healing may never come. One particularly challenging moment occurred when my father's old business partner called. He wanted to discuss an upcoming investment opportunity that involved the estate's assets. My siblings, who had previously acted as a unified front, attempted to undermine my input, suggesting that I had no experience or was only motivated by money. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time, I channeled it into preparation and clarity. I meticulously reviewed every document, analyzed the financial implications, and presented a well-reasoned argument that left no room for dismissal. For the first time, I felt a measure of empowerment. I realized that my fight was not only about the inheritance, but about reclaiming my voice, asserting my competence, and proving that integrity and diligence matter more than manipulation or intimidation. Slowly, a sense of equilibrium began to emerge. I was no longer defined solely by the conflict. I began to focus on building my own life, pursuing personal and professional goals that had been sidelined during the litigation. I invested in projects I cared about, nurtured relationships that brought joy, and reclaimed a sense of control over my own narrative. And yet, there were moments when the past resurfaced with a sharp sting. During a family wedding, I overheard whispers about my greed and lack of loyalty, and I felt the old pangs of frustration and hurt. But instead of engaging, I reminded myself of the long journey I had endured, the hours of preparation, the battles fought, the victories earned. I realized that their perceptions did not define my reality or my values. One of the most profound realizations came when I reflected on my father's intentions. He had always valued fairness, integrity, and courage. By standing up for myself, I had honored those principles, even when it meant confronting family. I understood that love and respect are not always expressed through agreement or harmony. They can also be demonstrated through commitment to truth, accountability, and moral conviction. Over the following months, I began to rebuild bridges where possible, though cautiously. I reached out to my siblings with gestures of goodwill, helping with minor administrative matters related to the estate, sending thoughtful notes, and attempting to engage in neutral conversation. Some responded with warmth, albeit guarded, while others remained distant. I learned to accept that not everyone would embrace reconciliation, and that was okay. The act of extending the hand mattered, even if it was not always reciprocated. At the same time, I cultivated a sense of gratitude for those who had supported me, friends, extended family, and mentors who had witnessed my struggle and offered guidance. Their presence reminded me that family is not only defined by blood, but also by those who stand with you in moments of trial. And then came an unexpected development. My siblings, after months of reflection, approached me with a proposal to collaborate on a family legacy project. They acknowledged past mistakes, admitted to unfairness, and expressed a desire to move forward in a constructive way. I was cautious naturally, but also curious. We began meeting to plan a charitable foundation in our father's name, a project that would honor his values, benefit the community, and provide a space for cooperative engagement. The process was tentative and fraught with reminders of past tensions, but it was also a step toward healing. I realized that the inheritance battle had set the stage not only for justice, but for eventual reconciliation, albeit slowly and imperfectly. Through this journey, I discovered resilience I had not known I possessed. I learned to navigate betrayal without losing myself, to assert boundaries without severing ties, and to pursue justice without descending into vindictiveness. I had faced my siblings, the courtroom, and my own doubts, and emerged with integrity and tact. Am I wrong for taking my siblings to court over the inheritance? Absolutely not. I acted with courage, principle, and respect for my father's wishes. The process was painful, emotionally taxing, and at times isolating, but it affirmed my belief in fairness, accountability, and the power of standing up for oneself. In the end, the inheritance was more than just financial. It was a testament to perseverance, self-respect, and the enduring influence of a parent's values. I had fought not only for my share, but for the dignity that comes from unwavering commitment to truth. And while the relationships with my siblings were forever changed, I emerged wiser, stronger, and more grounded in the understanding that justice, courage, and personal integrity are worth every trial endured. The final stretch of this journey was unlike anything I had imagined. After months of legal battles, emotional turbulence, and fractured family dynamics, I realized that the true challenge was not winning the inheritance, but navigating what came next, life after the fight. The court had ruled in my favor. My siblings had no legal recourse left, and the estate was finally distributed according to my father's intentions. Yet the silence that followed was deafening. Family gatherings felt awkward, each smile carefully measured, each conversation laced with the invisible weight of past conflicts. I found myself reflecting more and more on what had been lost. Not the money, but the trust, the innocence, and the effortless bonds of childhood. One evening, I decided to take a long walk to clear my mind. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves crunched beneath my feet in a rhythm that matched my contemplative heartbeat. I thought about my father, how proud he had been of my dedication, how he had always taught me to act with integrity even when it was hard. That memory became my anchor. I realized that despite the pain, I had honored his legacy not just through legal channels, but through my perseverance, ethical conduct, and unwavering commitment to what was right. Slowly, I began reaching out to my siblings, but this time with a different approach. Instead of demanding acknowledgement or seeking reconciliation on their terms, I offered gestures of goodwill that were small but meaningful. I sent a personalized gift to my sister on her birthday, something thoughtful that acknowledged her personal interests rather than our conflicts. To my brother, I offered assistance with a charitable project he was passionate about, even though I was aware he might interpret it through a lens of suspicion. These were small steps, but they were deliberate, meant to signal that I was willing to build bridges without compromising my own dignity. Weeks turned into months, and subtle shifts began to appear. My siblings' responses were cautious but noticeably warmer. Conversations that once would have ended in tense silence now included polite exchanges and even glimpses of humor. The wounds had not fully healed, but cracks had begun to form in the walls of resentment. In the midst of this, I also focused on rebuilding my own life beyond family strife. I invested in personal projects I had postponed for years, nurtured friendships that had sustained me during the darkest periods, and even started exploring hobbies I had neglected. I learned to savor moments of peace, to recognize joy in small accomplishments, and to celebrate the freedom that came with reclaiming my own agency. One pivotal moment came unexpectedly during a casual family gathering at my uncle's house. The room was filled with distant relatives, some of whom had watched the inheritance saga unfold with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. My siblings were present, but instead of the usual tension, there was a sense of cautious truce. Conversation flowed more naturally, and I realized I no longer felt the need to defend every action or prove my worth. I was simply present, confident in the knowledge that I had done what was right. During that gathering, my father's longtime friend approached me. He looked at me with a mix of pride and relief and said, "You've honored him in ways I don't think even he could have imagined. You stood up not just for your share, but for what's just. That's what matters." Those words struck me deeply. They reminded me that while legal victories are tangible, the true measure of success lies in integrity, perseverance, and the ability to act with principle even when the path is difficult. As time progressed, I began to notice the subtle ways my family dynamic had shifted. My siblings, while still cautious, engaged more openly in discussions about shared memories, childhood experiences, and even collaborative projects related to the estate. I realized that while the inheritance had initially driven a wedge between us, it also forced us to confront issues that had been festering beneath the surface for years. In an unexpected turn, my brother proposed a joint initiative to honor our father's memory through a charitable foundation. He acknowledged past mistakes and expressed a desire to work together constructively. My sister, too, showed tentative enthusiasm, suggesting programs that aligned with her passions. I approached these proposals cautiously, aware of the potential for conflict, but also recognizing the opportunity for reconciliation and shared purpose. We began planning the foundation in earnest. Meetings were filled with both tension and collaboration, moments of disagreement and breakthroughs in understanding. I realized that this project was about more than philanthropy. It was a test of whether fractured family ties could be repaired through shared goals, respect, and open communication. During this process, I also took time for self-reflection. I considered the journey I had undertaken, from the shock of betrayal, through the grueling court battles, to the cautious steps toward reconciliation. I recognized the growth I had achieved: resilience, strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics without losing my sense of self. These lessons were invaluable, shaping not only my approach to family, but to life itself. One day, as we finalized the first major initiative of the foundation, I looked around the room at my siblings. They were still flawed, still prone to occasional defensiveness. But there was a new energy, a willingness to collaborate, a recognition of shared responsibility, and a budding respect that had been absent before. I felt a surge of gratitude and cautious optimism. I realized that while full restoration of our relationships might never occur, progress was possible, and that was worth celebrating. I also acknowledged that my actions had consequences beyond the legal realm. By standing up for myself, I had set a precedent for integrity, accountability, and courage. I had demonstrated that it is possible to confront injustice without becoming consumed by anger, to assert boundaries while remaining open to dialogue, and to pursue fairness even when it comes at personal cost. In quiet moments, I reflected on the emotional weight I had carried throughout this ordeal. The feelings of betrayal, anger, and hurt had been intense, but they had also been catalysts for growth. I had learned to manage conflict, to prioritize self-respect, and to navigate the complexities of family dynamics with maturity and composure. And so, as the foundation began to take shape, as collaborative efforts with my siblings unfolded, and as my own life moved forward with renewed purpose, I felt a sense of closure, not in the sense of erasing the past, but in the sense of understanding, acceptance, and the ability to act with integrity. Am I wrong for taking my siblings to court over the inheritance? Absolutely not. Every step I took was guided by principle, fairness, and respect for my father's intentions. The emotional toll was high, but the lessons learned, the boundaries established, and the personal growth achieved were worth every moment of struggle. In the end, the inheritance was more than financial. It was a crucible that tested my character, resilience, and moral conviction. I emerged stronger, wiser, and more grounded, with a renewed understanding that justice, courage, and integrity are values worth defending, even in the most painful and complicated circumstances. And while the relationships with my siblings will always carry the shadow of past conflicts, there is hope, however tentative, that shared purpose, accountability, and mutual respect can forge a path toward understanding, reconciliation, and a legacy that honors not just our father, but the principles we carry forward